She called the cops to kick me off land my family's owned since Teddy Roosevelt was in office. Loretta Grant, self-declared HOA president and part-time dictator, stormed onto Ellison Acres holding a stopwatch, like she was timing my funeral. "You've got exactly 3 minutes to take down that fence," she said, voice sharp enough to cut barbed wire, "or I'm calling 911. And God bless her deluded little heart, she actually did it. She called the police on me for trespassing on my own property, the same property my grandfather cleared by hand, the same land my father and I worked side by side until cancer took him 2 years ago. Loretta strutted around like she was auditioning for a reality show called HOA Wars, snapping photos of my fence like they were evidence in a federal crime. But Loretta made one mistake. One loud, humiliating, legally devastating. She didn't know who I was, and she definitely didn't know what that fence meant. Comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened next made HOA history. The fence she wanted me to rip out? It wasn't just wood and nails, it was the last thing my father and I built together. Every board was a story, every rail a lesson. We'd spent months working on it. Him teaching me how to sink cedar posts deep enough to outlast a Texas drought, how to measure twice, cut once, and how to argue with dignity. The oak we used for the rails came from trees that had fallen on our land during a freak storm 20 years ago. My dad never threw anything away if it could be repurposed. Called it Depression-era wisdom with a country twist. That fence was more than a barrier. It was a tribute, a monument to sweat equity, legacy, and a bond you can't buy at Home Depot. And now this woman, with her designer purse and government complex ego, wanted it gone in 3 minutes flat. I didn't say much, just stood there with my coffee mug and watched her fumble with her phone like she was casting a spell. I could have ended it right there, flashed my badge, dropped the title, told her she'd just threatened the county sheriff on record. But I let her dig. I let her dig like a raccoon in a garden patch, just waiting for her to hit something she couldn't chew through. She started taking measurements from the fence to the edge of her imaginary property line, muttering about visual blight and community values, like my family's legacy was a pile of old tires. She didn't even notice Myrtle Collins standing in her rose garden next door, pretending to prune while clearly leaning in like she was front row at a soap opera. Loretta caught sight of her too and turned up the volume like a stage actress with something to prove. 3 minutes, Mr. Ellison, she shouted again. After that, I'm filing a formal complaint, and trust me, the board always sides with me. That's when I figured it was time for a little education. I reached under the porch table, pulled out the old land deed, laminated by my dad years ago because, as he put it, one day some fool's gonna question your roots. I laid it flat like it was the U.S. Constitution. This land, I said, has been Ellison Acres since before Pine Hollow had sidewalks. We're not under your HOA. Never have been, never will be. Lorita's smile twitched like a shorted-out porch light. She snatched the deed, squinted through her designer frames, and searched for a loophole that didn't exist. "We'll see what my lawyer says," she muttered, spinning on her heel. Then, with the flair of a villain in the second act, she turned back and smirked. "Oh, and I've scheduled an emergency HOA meeting. Topic, expanding boundaries to include problem properties." With that, she marched off, barking into her phone about ordinances, blight zones, and removing obstacles. As soon as she disappeared around the hedge, Myrtle came hustling across the yard like she was on a mission from God. "Hank, you'd better watch your six," she whispered, wiping her gloves on her apron. "Loretta's been telling folks your ranch is attracting coyotes and lowering property values. Yesterday she told Maureen at the diner that she's got a plan to clean up Pine Hollow once and for all." I didn't say much. He just looked over at the old framed photo inside my door. Me and Dad, sweaty and smiling, standing next to that freshly built fence. I whispered more to myself than to her, "This is my land. My law." Myrtle nodded solemnly, then leaned in and added, "And if you're smart, you'll get ahead of whatever she's cooking." That night, I pulled out the county maps, HOA bylaws, and zoning codes and started highlighting. She thought I was just some cowboy with a coffee cup and a fence, but I've been sheriff of this county for 8 years, And if Loretta Grant thought she could clock my legacy with a stopwatch, she was about to find out she picked the wrong man to time. She really did it. Loretta actually called the police on me over a fence that's been standing longer than her HOA's bylaws have been laminated. 20 minutes after her little exit performance, I saw the cruiser roll up, tires crunching the gravel like they were about to make an arrest, and out stepped Officer Caleb Price. Poor kid looked fresh out of the academy, with a face that hadn't seen enough sun and hands still too nervous to rest easy on a holster. He took one look at me, and his eyes widened like he'd just spotted the sheriff at a surprise inspection. Which, to be fair, he had. Caleb tried not to show it, bless his heart, but the badge on my hip had more years on it than he had on the planet. I stayed quiet, sipping coffee, watching the gears in his head try to decide if he should salute or cite me. Nothing like watching a rookie wrestle between protocol and self-preservation. Loretta came power-walking up from the road again like she'd been summoned by dramatic timing. Her lipstick was perfect, but her logic was about to fall apart. "Officer," she said in a voice that could peel paint, "this man is in violation of HOA Regulation 7.3, unauthorized structures impacting visual symmetry." Caleb blinked at her like she was reading from a cereal box. She handed him a stack of papers, probably printed off a Yahoo group thread, and gestured at my fence like she'd caught me building a moonshine still. I didn't move. I just reached behind me, lifted the land deed off the porch table, and handed it to Caleb. "This property," I said calmly, "has been Ellison Acres since 1911. HOA was incorporated in 74. You do the math." Caleb stared at the document like it was the Bible in Latin, his lips moving slightly as he read. He looked back at me. "Sheriff Ellison?" he asked, almost like it was a question. I nodded once. Loretta's color drained faster than sweet tea in August. She didn't fold, though. "Oh no, Loretta Grant doesn't retreat. She re-strategizes. We'll just expand the HOA borders," she snapped. "All it takes is a vote." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, like she wasn't sure if the words tasted as strong coming out as they had in her head. I saw it then, the shift. Her arrogance was still there, but now it had a twitch. She realized the fence wasn't her real problem. I was. That's when I knew this wasn't about setback lines or community uniformity. This was about leverage, about territory. And I started wondering why she wanted this dirt so bad. Her eyes flicked down the road just for a second, toward the wooded ridge that borders the east side of my land. That wasn't nothing. A woman like Loretta only looks twice when something's worth money or power or both. Later that afternoon, Myrtle came by with a tray of lemon bars and a file folder. Around here, that's the Pine Hollow version of a subpoena. She handed me the folder like it was radioactive. "That woman's been busy," she said, "talking to every board member, dangling incentives like they're Christmas hams. I even heard she's been meeting with some fella from out of town. Horizon Equity or some such. Real estate firm." I slipped through the folder. HOA emails, half-whispered gossip typed in full caps, and a blurry screenshot of Loretta having coffee with a slick-looking man in a gray suit. "He's been sniffing around the East Ridge," Myrtle added, setting down the lemon bars like evidence in a trial. "You think that's a coincidence?" I didn't. Coincidences in Pine Hollow are as rare as a quiet PTA meeting. Something was brewing, and my land was the teapot. I looked out across Ellison Acres. The pastures, the fence, the old barn that still smelled like my dad's work boots, and tried to make sense of it all. Loretta had never cared about my place until recently. Now she wanted it boxed, labeled, and paved over, and she wasn't coming with bylaws anymore. She was coming with buyers, the kind who wear suits that don't wrinkle and smile without blinking. I'd seen that kind before when I was younger working the county fraud desk. They always show up after the legacy's been cracked open, never before. "She's not after your fence, Hank," Myrtle said quietly, her eyes narrowing like she could see through the ridge itself. "She's after what's under it." And right then, I knew I wasn't dealing with an overzealous neighbor anymore. I was dealing with a termite queen, harmless on the surface, but chewing through the foundation the whole damn time. I thanked Myrtle and walked her back to her gate, my mind running faster than my boots. Loretta had a plan, and it had nothing to do with symmetry or setback lines. She wanted the land. She needed the land, and if she couldn't shame me off it, she'd try to take it piece by piece. I went back inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and stared at the map spread across the table. The East Ridge, the fencing line, the zoning boundaries. It all started to line up. She wasn't just bluffing. She was building towards something. And the worst part? The clock had already started ticking. Because with people like Loretta, it's never just a bad day. It's the first move in a long game, and she was already counting down. Stay with me, because the next move she made, it wasn't just desperate. It was criminal. By the time the HOA board showed up the next morning, I'd already finished my coffee and most of the crossword. Loretta came marching down the driveway like she was leading a parade, trailed by 3 of her finest followers. One was a wiry man in his 50s who looked like he regretted getting out of bed. Another was a stern woman with a clipboard that she held like a Bible. And the third was a kid in a suit 2 sizes too big, filming everything on his phone like he thought this was going to end up on the local news. Loretta, bless her overachieving heart, acted like she was directing a courtroom drama. "Time's up, Ellison," she snapped, clicking her stopwatch like it was some kind of detonator. I'm calling my contacts at the department right now." The problem was, her contacts didn't outrank me, and she'd just walked into her own ambush, with cameras rolling. Officer Kalim pulled up right on cue, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. His boots were clean, his eyes wide, and the second he saw me standing on the porch, he hesitated. "Officer Price?" I said calmly, setting my coffee down. "You have a minute?" He nodded slowly, glancing at Loretta, who was now dramatically flipping through a manila folder stuffed with poorly printed HOA documents. "This man," she declared to the camera, "is in flagrant violation of Ordinance 7.3. I demand he be removed." Caleb looked like a deer in front of a grill. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see documentation regarding jurisdiction," he stammered. I reached for the laminated land deed and set it beside my badge on the porch rail, letting the morning sun do the talking. The board members squinted. The camera guy shifted. "Loretta?" She blinked once, twice, like her brain needed buffering. That's when I saw the cracks in her crown. The man with the clipboard gave a nervous cough. The woman's pen stopped moving, her poker face starting to twitch. And the kid filming, he slowly lowered the phone like it had just burned his hand. They were starting to realize they hadn't walked into a code enforcement matter. They'd wandered into a standoff with the sheriff. "Sheriff Ellison," Caleb said carefully, louder now, more official. "It's clear this property isn't under HOA jurisdiction." Loretta's eyes darted between the badge and the camera, like she couldn't decide what to attack first. But I made a call," she sputtered. "Chief Morrison plays golf with my husband. You can't just—" "Oh, but I could. And I hadn't even played my best card yet." Right about then, a silver pickup rolled up the drive, and out stepped Deputy Roy Bennett, my right-hand man, longtime friend, and former high school linebacker who still looked like he could bench press a fence post. Roy took one look at the scene and grinned like Christmas had come early. "Morning, Sheriff," he called, tipping his hat. "Everything all right here?" Loretta turned, mouth agape, lips moving but no sound coming out. It was like watching a record skip live. "Sheriff?" she finally managed to gasp. "You're the sheriff?" She said it like I'd just confessed to being a wizard. I gave her a polite nod. "That's correct, ma'am. Have been for 8 years now." The HOA board looked like they wanted to melt into the grass. I could see them recalculating everything, what they'd said, what they'd filmed, and how far they might have just stepped in it. Loretta fumbled for her phone again, hands trembling, voice rising. "This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have a case. You can't intimidate us with badges." She waved her phone around like it was a wand that might make this all disappear, but her followers were already backing up. The clipboard woman muttered something about needing to verify protocol, and the camera kid mumbled, "I think I'm going to delete this footage." Roy leaned over to me, whispering just loud enough. "She brought the cavalry, not realizing you own the stable." I cracked a smile. "Let her run. She'll trip on her own tail." Because I wasn't just dealing with a control freak in pearls anymore. I was staring down a woman with a motive. And people like that, they always come back louder when they're cornered. As the board slowly scattered, Loretta turned and stormed off without another word. But I saw it. Just before she reached the road, she stopped to glance down at her phone one last time, thumb hovering over something she wasn't ready to show. That wasn't defeat, that was recalculation, the kind of look you see in poker when someone folds but plans to come back with a bigger hand. And I knew right then, this wasn't about fence codes or property values. She had a plan, and I'd just delayed it, not ended it. So stay with me, because the next time Loretta showed up, she wasn't holding a stopwatch, she was holding a grudge. If this story hits close to home, or if you've ever had to stand your ground against a pushy HOA, send this video to a friend who's been through the same mess. Stories like these remind us we're not alone in the fight to protect what matters. And hey, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Was I too patient, or just patient enough? I woke up to silence. Not peace and quiet, silence. The kind that tells you something's wrong before your feet even hit the floor. I turned the tap in the kitchen and nothing came out but a wheeze and a slow, muddy drip. I checked the bathroom. Same. Then I stepped outside and followed the irrigation line down toward the pasture. That's where I found it. A slow leak just past the shutoff valve, puddling the soil like someone had tried to bury a lie and missed the hole. Tool marks were fresh. Pipe scratched like someone had fumbled with a wrench in the dark. And not just any wrench. A hand that didn't know the system, but sure knew how to break things quietly. I didn't need a lab test to know what happened. This wasn't bad luck. This was sabotage, with a side of cowardice. Just as I stood up, Myrtle Collins came around the corner with her Pomeranian trotting beside her like a puffball on a mission. She stopped short when she saw the mess. "Oh, Hank," she said, shaking her head. "I saw someone messing with that last night. Looked like Loretta's nephew, that boy with the earring and the sense of a soup can." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper like she was delivering gossip wrapped in gold foil. "He was out here with tools. I thought he was working on the streetlight, but I guess not." I nodded slowly, piecing it together. Loretta wasn't swinging at my fence anymore. She was aiming for the veins of the property. Water lines, irrigation, infrastructure, the invisible things that make a ranch livable. First the stopwatch, now the shutoff. She was escalating. And the smarter part of me, the part that used to investigate insurance fraud, knew she wasn't just trying to annoy me, she was laying groundwork. Deputy Roy stopped by that afternoon, holding a manila folder like it had teeth. He didn't bother with a hello, just set it on the table and flipped it open. "Boss," he said, tapping one of the documents. "This woman's not just a pain. She's a liability with a past." Inside were records from 5 years back. First Federal Bank, internal audit, discrepancies in 3 separate client accounts, and one name that kept popping up, Loretta Grant. "They let her go quiet," Roy added. "Swept it under the rug to avoid headlines. But she didn't land on her feet. She landed on a mission." I scanned the pages, the math not adding up unless you factored in desperation. Loretta hadn't just built her HOA throne out of bylaws, she'd built it out of ashes. Her banking career had gone up in smoke, and now she was rebuilding her legacy one land grab at a time. Then came the real kicker. Roy slid over a printed email. "Horizon Equity," he said. "Big-time development firm. Loretta's been in contact with one of their regional reps. Emails, planning notes, even a map with your ranch outlined in red ink like a bullseye." I stared at it, feeling the slow burn crawl up my neck. They want to build a commercial complex, shopping center, gas station, maybe a gated condo lot. Guess whose property cuts that plan in half? I didn't have to guess. It was the same reason my water lines were leaking, and my name was getting dragged through HOA gossip threads like I was selling moonshine. Loretta wasn't playing HOA anymore. She was dealing poker chips with someone else's money. Problem was, she was bluffing with monopoly bills and hoping nobody asked to cash out. I sat back in my chair, staring at the deed framed on the wall, my father's handwriting still clear on the corner. Ellison Acres for keeps. That's what she was after. Not just my land, but what it meant, the permanence, the legacy, the immovability of it. Loretta couldn't build something that would last, so she was trying to hijack something that already had. But I wasn't about to fold. Not to someone who brought sabotage to a land dispute. Not to someone who thought a stopwatch could measure history. She was trying to make me emotional, trying to push me into a mistake. But if there's one thing ranchers and sheriffs know better than most, it's how to outwait a storm. So I got methodical. I pulled out the county zoning maps, highlighted easements, scanned every paragraph of HOA regulation, even the ones printed in font sizes made for ants. If she wanted to play legal chicken, I'd be the truck. She was building pressure, hoping I'd snap. But I'd been trained to hold steady under worse. And besides, Loretta was showing her cards now. Desperate people always do. You can only bluff for so long before someone calls, and I was about to call hard. Stick with me, because what I found in her next move, let's just say, it didn't involve water. It involved fire. The video hit Pine Hollow like a tornado in a church picnic. Grainy, shaky footage of what looked like me, red-faced screaming at an elderly woman in a grocery store parking lot. The audio was distorted just enough to sound like I was using every word you'd get fined for on daytime radio. Within hours, it was all over the community message boards. Sheriff explodes on senior, unfit to serve, time to clean house. It was like watching your own barn catch fire and being told it was your match that did it. I knew it was fake. Anyone who knew me knew it was fake. But in a town like Pine Hollow, a video spreads faster than truth ever will. Especially when Loretta's the one holding the lighter. She wasted no time, filed a formal complaint, dropped a harassment suit with just enough legal padding to make it look real, and started walking around town like she was the victim of a violent regime. Her smile got wider, her perfume got stronger, her lies got louder. I was summoned to the county board that same week. Pending a full investigation, they said, "We're asking you to step down temporarily." I'd been sheriff for 8 years, not a scratch on my record, and now I was watching a group of people I'd protected since before their kids could spell sheriff tell me to hand over my badge because of a pixelated fairy tale. I slid it across the table, along with my sidearm, and walked out of that office with my head high, even as the ground felt like it was shifting underneath me. Word travels fast when power shifts. Folks who used to wave at me from their porches suddenly looked down at their mailboxes when I drove past. I got sideways glances at the diner, whispered questions at the hardware store. Loretta's version of the story was taking root, and if you've ever tried pulling weeds in Texas soil, you know how hard it is to yank something once it's dug in deep. But here's the thing about roots. They don't stand a chance when the foundation's rotten, and one evening, that foundation cracked. Rookie Officer Caleb Price showed up at my door looking like someone had stolen his spine. "Sheriff," he started, eyes wide and voice trembling. I need to talk." I let him in, poured him coffee, and waited. He broke faster than a screen door in a windstorm. Told me Loretta had approached him after the incident, said if he didn't confirm the footage as real, she'd make sure he never made it past probation. "She said she had connections," Caleb muttered. "Told me it was a loyalty test. Said if I didn't back her up, she'd tell everyone I wasn't fit for the job." He looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "I'm sorry, Sheriff, I panicked. I thought if I helped her just once, it'd go away." I could have yelled. I could have kicked him out. But I didn't. Because, truthfully, I didn't blame him. People like Loretta don't ask. They corner. They whisper in your ear while twisting your arm behind your back. Caleb reached into his coat and handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here. The raw footage, the editing history, even emails where she coached me on what to say in my report." I took it, my hands steady but my heart beating like a bass drum. This wasn't just redemption. It was ammunition, the kind of thing that didn't just clear your name. It exposed the puppeteer. "Will you testify?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "I'll tell them everything," he said, wiping his face. "It's time somebody stood up to her." I sat back, finally exhaling. The damage she'd done wouldn't be undone overnight, but with Caleb's confession and the files in my hand, I had something better than hope. I had leverage. So I made a call to Deputy Roy. "Get ready," I told him, "because we're taking this fight out of the dirt and into the courtroom. Stick with me. Because the next time we meet, Loretta's going to try and cry her way out of a corner she built herself, and this time, the jury won't be buying it." The courthouse was packed tighter than a church on Easter Sunday. Word had spread, and every seat in the gallery was filled with folks who either wanted to see justice served or just wanted to see Loretta Grant squirm. I walked in wearing the same boots I wore the day I became sheriff, not because I'm sentimental, but because sometimes the ground you're standing on deserves to remember who's in charge. Caleb sat in the witness box, pale but determined. The judge called the room to order, and the whole town leaned forward. And when that young man cleared his throat and said the video is fake, you could have heard a feather drop in the next county. He laid it all out. How Loretta had cornered him, pressured him, manipulated him. He even pulled out the email chain she'd sent, complete with step-by-step instructions on how to sell the lie. The jury didn't blink. They didn't need to. They were locked in. Next up was Roy. Now, Roy ain't a man who likes paperwork, but he walked in with a binder so thick it had its own gravity. "We traced Loretta's digital trail," he said, flipping through pages like he was reading bedtime stories. "Emails to Horizon Equity, property sketches, projected profits. She even set deadlines." He held up a document with my ranch circled in red. This land wasn't just a nuisance to her, it was the missing puzzle piece. The prosecutor handed the jury copies, and I watched their faces turn from curiosity to disgust. "She wasn't protecting Pine Hollow," Roy added. "She was flipping it." And just like that, the courtroom started to shift. Loretta wasn't just a nosy neighbor anymore, she was a schemer, a manipulator, a liar with a profit margin. But the hammer didn't fall until Myrtle took the stand. Sweet Myrtle, who folks usually knew for her lemon bars and garden gossip, came in holding a USB drive and wearing the kind of look that said she meant business. "I overheard Loretta say her password during a call," Myrtle explained. "She said it out loud while logging into an HOA meeting, so I wrote it down. Then I got help pulling her files." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And what did you find, Mrs. Collins?" Myrtle smiled, sugar-sweet. She hacked Deputy Roy's email, used his credentials to access confidential records, and fed them to Horizon Equity like candy. And with that, any sympathy the jury might have had for Loretta turned to ash. You could see it in their eyes. She wasn't just out of bounds, she was out of control. Loretta took the stand next, and that's when the show really started. She tried to weep, voice quivering like a middle school play. "I was only trying to help the community," she sniffled. "Everything I did was for the good of Pine Hollow." But when pressed, her mask slipped. The prosecutor asked one question too many, and Loretta snapped. "All I needed," she spat, eyes wild, "was 3 minutes to file the papers. Just 3!" She slammed her hand on the stand like she was starting a stopwatch. The courtroom went dead silent. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The judge slowly leaned forward and said, "Ms. Grant, are you admitting to a premeditated plan to seize the Ellison property?" She blinked once, then twice, then realized what she'd done. I stood slowly, looked the jury in the eye, and said, "She used 3 minutes like a scalpel, cutting truth out of everything she touched. But the problem with carving your own story is eventually the blade turns." The jury didn't need much more. The judge dismissed the case with prejudice and referred Loretta to the district attorney for charges ranging from fraud to evidence tampering. As the bailiffs led her away, she kept muttering under her breath, 3 minutes, just 3 minutes. But the only thing ticking now was the clock on her reputation, winding down fast. As we stepped outside, folks clapped me on the back, shaking my hand, offering apologies for ever doubting me. Roy grinned and said, "Well, she called in the storm and you wrote it out." I nodded, but I didn't smile. Because as satisfying as it was to see Loretta finally tripped up by her own lies, I knew better than to let my guard down. People like her don't go away. They just regroup. And sure enough, before I could even reach my truck, I saw a man in a tailored suit watching from across the street. He wasn't from Pine Hollow. He didn't wave. But he was there, watching, calculating, and in his hand, a folder marked Phase 2. 3 days after the courthouse fireworks, I called for a town hall meeting. Not a legal proceeding, not a press event, just neighbors and folding chairs with coffee, cookies, and truth. We packed the community center tighter than a tractor in a one-car garage. Some folks came looking guilty, others came looking angry, but everyone came looking for answers. I stood up front, not as the sheriff this time, but as Hank Ellison, rancher, neighbor, and very tired recipient of H. Tonight, I said, we don't talk about ordinances. We talk about people, about what happens when trust gets twisted into power. That's when Myrtle Collins walked up beside me like a librarian with a vengeance. She brought receipts, literal screenshots of HOA emails, private chats, and Loretta's not-so-pool opinions about her neighbors. One had her calling the Hendersons garden-obsessed fossils. Another joked about turning someone's prized lilacs into mulch for a parking lot. But the kicker, one email read, "These fools will follow anyone with a clipboard. They won't even realize they're selling their souls until the bulldozers roll in." Gasps rippled through the crowd like someone had dropped a match in dry brush. The same folks who once nodded at Loretta's speeches were now shaking their heads like they'd just woken up from a bad dream. You could feel it in the room. A quiet swell of "we've had enough." And then, like she had a radar for drama, Loretta burst through the double doors with all the grace of a runaway leaf blower. Her hair was frizzed, her jacket crooked, and her phone already in hand like a courtroom prop. "You can't do this without me," she shrieked, stomping toward the front. "I am the president of this HOA, and I demand." She fumbled with her phone, tapping wildly until her familiar countdown app appeared. 3 minutes! She shouted, lifting it like a holy relic. "Just give me 3 minutes and I'll explain everything." But she didn't get applause. She got silence. The room watched her melt down like a discount candle, shouting, pacing, frantically pulling up old photos like they were evidence in a trial no one asked for. Watching her unravel was like seeing a Jenga tower of lies come crashing down, piece by screaming piece. Stanley Griggs, normally as exciting as beige paint, stood up from the second row and cleared his throat. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Ms. Grant as HOA president," he said firmly. "Effective immediately." Hands shot up like a popcorn machine caught fire. "All in favor?" Myrtle asked, voice steady. Almost every hand in the room rose, including a few from folks who used to sit at Loretta's potlucks. Her eyes darted around like she was trying to count the votes mid-panic. "You can't vote me out. I have contracts. I have legal authority," she wailed. "This isn't legal." The irony of her yelling about legality nearly broke my poker face. One of the Henderson boys muttered, "This is the best episode of HOA drama we've ever seen," and half the room chuckled despite themselves. Then, as she was escorted out, still screaming about minutes and conspiracies, her phone lit up. Not with a call, but with a notification preview that everyone in the front row could read. "Meeting confirmed. Horizon Equity. Phase 2 begins tomorrow." A few gasps escaped. I caught the eyes of Roy and Myrtle, who were already leaning in. Loretta might have been ousted, but the storm wasn't over, because in the parking lot, waiting by a sleek black car, stood a new face in a navy suit, with shoes too clean for Pine Hollow. He opened the car door for Loretta without a word, gave the crowd a single glance, then drove off like nothing had happened. And in that moment, I knew. She may have lost the crown, but she'd handed the keys to someone else. The next morning, I found myself holding a hammer instead of a court summons. Roy and I were out by the old cedar fence, patching up the damage Loretta had done in her campaign of chaos. We worked in silence, mostly. The kind of silence that comes when two men understand that sometimes rebuilding something with your own hands is the best way to let your mind catch up with your heart. That fence had been through it, cut, kicked, scratched up like a barn cat in a dog yard, but it was still standing. Just like us. You know, Roy said, lining up a new plank. Some folks spend their whole life building something that matters, and some just spend it trying to take it away. I nodded, wiping the sweat off my brow. The difference is who still has a hammer when the storm clears. We were halfway through when Myrtle rolled up carrying a pitcher of sweet tea like it was a peace offering from the gods. "Y'all look like two mules in July," she said, handing us glasses and pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "Thought this might cool you off. Oh, and this." She unfolded the page with a grin that meant business. So we voted to amend the bylaws. Effective immediately, Ellison's Acres is excluded from any current or future governance proposals. You're officially off their radar, Hank. Permanently. I let out a slow breath, felt the weight lift from my shoulders like someone had turned off gravity for a second. Roy grinned, raised his glass, and said, "Well, I'll be. You're finally untouchable." I smiled back, but I knew better. Nothing's ever truly untouchable, especially when money's still sniffing around the fence line. That night, just as the crickets started tuning up and the porch light buzzed to life, a sleek, black car rolled up the drive. Didn't belong in Pine Hollow. Looked like it belonged in a corporate parking garage with valet and fresh espresso. A woman stepped out. Neat suit, confident walk, clipboard in hand. She didn't introduce herself. Didn't offer a name, just smiled like a door-to-door messiah and said, "Mr. Ellison, I represent Horizon Equity. I understand the HOA situation's been resolved. Thought now might be a good time to discuss future opportunities for your property." I leaned on the railing, sipping coffee I'd let go cold. "Ma'am," I said slowly, "I've had more opportunities in the last 3 months than I've had hot dinners. What makes yours any different?" She chuckled like she'd rehearsed it. "Because the obstacles are gone, we're not looking to fight, we're looking to collaborate. You've got the last piece of land we need, and I think we can make each other very comfortable." Her words were smooth, but her eyes were measuring. Every inch of me, every corner of the ranch behind me. "It's not for sale," I replied, flat as a fence post. "Wasn't for Loretta. Won't be for you." She didn't flinch, just pulled out a card and placed it on the porch rail. "We'll be in touch. The world's changing, Mr. Ellison. Might as well get ahead of it." Then she turned, got back in her spaceship of a car, and disappeared down the road like smoke in a crosswind. Just as the dust settled, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just 5 words. Phase 2 starts in 3 minutes. I stared at the screen. Let the words sink in like a stone in a well. New face, same playbook. Loretta had passed the torch, or dropped it in the hands of someone colder, richer, and less likely to scream in public. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about acquisition. The stopwatch had been replaced by spreadsheets. But it didn't matter what they brought next. I'd survived sabotage, slander, and one very public HOA implosion. And I wasn't going anywhere. Not for them, not for their plans, and not for any number typed on a screen. I walked back to the fence, ran my hand along the smooth cedar rail my father and I had set together so many years ago. The sun was low, casting that golden hour light that makes everything feel earned. Roy came out with 2 fresh mugs of coffee. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just thinking how they always try new faces, new terms, new threats, but the story never changes." He handed me the mug, then said something I'll never forget. "Some men inherit land, others inherit the fight to keep it." I looked out over Ellison Acres and knew exactly which one I was. This is my land, my law, and they can come in waves, but I'll be standing here, holding the line. And maybe that's the whole point, isn't it? That in a world full of shortcuts and quick deals, some things aren't meant to be bought, bullied, or bulldozed. Some things, like honor, like family, like a cedar fence built by hand, are worth protecting, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Loretta thought this was about rules. Horizon thinks it's about profit. But for folks like me, for people like you, it's always been about principle. Because land isn't just dirt. It's memory. It's the sound of your father's voice while teaching you how to hold a hammer. It's the smile of a neighbor who brings sweet tea when the world goes sideways. It's the quiet you earn after standing tall through the noise. And the truth is, if you don't defend that, nobody else will. So if you found this story valuable, if it made you smile, clench your fists, or just nod along, share it with a friend who's been through their own version of this fight, someone who knows what it means to hold the line. And hey, leave a comment below and let me know what part hit home for you. I read every one. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because next week's story, let's just say the bulldozer's got a name tag this time, and the gloves are off. You won't want to miss it.